Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for the next instalment in our series of ArtsFest online events. Today, Fine Art Master students from the University will put their questions to Dean Kelland and James Latunji-Cockbill for part 2 of their talk on the HMP Grendon Artist Residency. If you'd like to watch part 1, it is available on YouTube. Over to you, Niki.
Hi, thanks Claire. And thanks Dean and James. On behalf of the MA students at Wolverhampton, I'd just like to thank you both for giving us an opportunity to engage with you over the residency and any other wider conversations that might come up in this time. So if I can start with a fairly easy question, I hope. How did you both feel when going to the prison for the first time in your current context?
Well, we've probably got different answers to this, haven't we, James? Because the first time I went was when I was kind of aware that the residency was being renewed, that there was that Ikon were looking for a new artist in residence, and I went to the annual exhibition. And it's I kind of always say about this, I got a very kind of I don't know if diluted is the right word. So the exhibition was in the conference centre, which is within the grounds of the prison. So you still have to go through security, but you're not, or at that point, I didn't go through any of the wings or any of the main area of the prison. And the conference centre is kind of the place where events happen. So it was kind of a strange experience for me. And I think I've said to James before, having never been to a prison before, let alone a category B prison, I kind of had this kind of distorted or kind of TV version of what it would be like. And I kind of thought that the residents there would be kind of brought in a line by the guards, and they'd be wearing uniforms and all those kind of things. And actually, I just went in to quite a crowded space, headed for the tea first, and kind of bumped into somebody and kind of apologised and said, "No, you go ahead of me." And he kind of said to me, "No, don't worry, I've got plenty of time here." And then I kind of realised that he was a resident and started to look round and thought, "Oh, okay, so there's no kind of distinction or kind of huge distinction. We're just all here together." And that and that kind of broke a few kind of preconceptions straight away, really. I think the first time I went into the wings was when I kind of went for the interview for the residency. And again, I was just kind of I was interviewed by a panel of the men, and then kind of ended up in a corridor for about half an hour talking to one of them about the paintings that they were making. And just kind of felt at ease and kind of felt relaxed. And so I guess how I kind of felt was probably surprised, because I didn't kind of think I'd feel that at ease, really. So I kind of came away kind of thinking, yeah, that was kind of, that's the same as any experience I've had where I kind of meet new people and talk about art with them. So, yeah, I think it's kind of strange, but in a good way, perhaps. Yeah. I think you went earlier, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd been to the same, I mean, I went to that exact same event on the same day, but I'd also been to the annual exhibition, I think twice before then. And I mean, the first experience was definitely the one that really stuck with me. I mean, it wasn't a full room of people when I walked in. I walked in with press and PR people and other members of staff and stakeholders. And we went and formed a queue and got a cup of tea. And then all of the residents from Grendon came in at the same time, and you could feel the atmosphere kind of stiffen up in the room, kind of unfairly, and based on your kind of preconceptions of what a Cat B prison is, and the kind of things that we know that the men have done in their past and why they're there. but yeah, I mean, for me, looking at the residency as a whole, the atmosphere and kind of how we respond to it is informed by the architecture, and less so as we've gone on, for sure, because you get used to whatever position you're in, and you know, in the prison, you get used to the different spaces. But you know, I mean, going onto the wings for the first time, it's quite a close enclosed space, or it feels like that, even though you know, they go up 4 stories. And there certainly is a great deal of community space there. There are lots of rooms off corridors. You know, the corridors are really, there are corridors everywhere, very long corridors that you walk down. So, I mean, it can take us kind of at least 5 minutes, Dean, to walk from the education wing, which is where your studio is, down to the bottom of the wings. And you just kind of walk down these long corridors and say hello to everybody you pass. And that's kind of the etiquette. But the architecture is really, it really kind of informs your experience, I think. And you know, the fact that we will have our own space to do workshops in when we return, it feels really important because of that, because space seems so kind of key to the residency.
I mean, I guess one of the things as well that I was kind of really aware of, and rightly so, James and I are key holders, and therefore we're responsible for opening and locking doors, and in a prison that is a responsibility. That's quite a thing, and I think in the first kind of month or so, I certainly was, I was kind of painfully aware of the constant locking and checking and double checking. And interestingly, I was kind of talking to one of the men about it, and he said, you see, when you've been inside as long as most of us have, we don't notice doors and locks. And I thought that was a really interesting thing that he was kind of saying, it just doesn't register to us. And kind of, I think you kind of think surely that's one thing you would kind of be painfully aware of, but he was just like, you filter it out over a period of time. And I think, and this isn't an admission that I don't check, because I do check and double check when I've locked something, but I think you become less aware of it. It becomes part of the fabric of your movement around the place. And so I'm kind of less conscious of the amount of times I'll open and close something in a day, which must be a huge amount, really. You know.
I remember Edmund Clark, who's the former artist in residence, during our handover, I said, do you just get used to the constant locking and unlocking? Because it just seems so unusual to me. And he said, the moment you get used to it, you'll make a mistake. And if you leave any door open, somebody will notice, and then it comes up on the minutes the next morning, and there's a kind of inquiry into what's happened. And that, bearing in mind that they're almost always double doors anyway. Yeah. So, you know, you could leave one open and it's still secure, you know, not as secure, but yeah. And I mean, it was really odd to me. I think that the good thing for us, Dean, is that we tend to just move as a pair almost always. So if one of us was going to make a mistake, then the other one would notice, which is kind of good, really, because I don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah, and often being in a pair means that, I mean, because the actual action is double doors, so there's 4 locks just to move through from one space to another. And often we'll just take a door each, I think. And so you're used to working in that way, aren't you? That
yeah, it's quicker.
Yeah. But yeah, a huge amount of locks we open and close in a day. Yeah, I don't know how we got onto that. It was me meandering away, wasn't it? But yeah.
Well, I think,
it's sorry, go on.
No, you're okay. You carry on.
I was just going to say, you know, I mean, that's kind of the pace of our day on the residency is slowed, you know, and I know that you've worked quicker on other residencies in the past, Dean. But yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know whether that's something that's frustrating to you, this idea of slowing down?
I think initially, and I think I probably at one of the public events, and I didn't mean to maybe say it in the way that it came across, I think initially there was a kind of frustration there. Not one that I was kind of thinking, you know, that I was getting kind of upset about. It was just something you have to adjust to, that the pace of the things that you do are always going to be slowed, and time does move differently. And it was just making that adjustment, really. I mean, the good thing about it, or I think it's a good thing, I think I probably, in terms of like the sketchbook work, I probably generated a similar amount of sketchbook work as I would have on a previous residency in the same time. But what I've been able to do is kind of maybe examine in greater depth kind of single ideas or single bits of research, because I've got that time. I'm kind of aware that, okay, well, this isn't going to happen until then, so I can really kind of start to pull this apart a little bit more. So it's kind of changed. It's certainly changed the way I'm kind of making work and thinking about work, but not necessarily in a negative way. You know, I think it's kind of it's been a really useful process, because it slowed me down as well, and I think sometimes that's a good thing, you know. So yeah, it's just a different way of working, I think, you know.
There's a lot of, you know, thinking about keys and locks, there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of routine in prison. I know that's something that's come up in your work before as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's certainly something that is going to kind of continue to kind of feature as a motif, I think, and perhaps has slightly more kind of resonances because of the place that I'm making the work and what the work's about. You know, so that's another aspect that I think will kind of be beneficial really to the work, that, you know, routine and repetition is so inherently woven into the fabric of the experience that it would naturally come through anyway. But I think it's going to be really kind of a useful strategy really in what I'm doing.
So following on from what you were just saying, Dean, about things slowing down and adapting a little bit, using it for your sketchbook work, with the uncertainty of the present situation, how might work produced differ or evolve in the event of further limitation of access to the facility, both in terms of your own work and the men's, I suppose?
Well, if I talk about my work, and then James can maybe talk about the work that the men are making. Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing, really. I don't feel that the lockdown has impacted negatively on what I'm doing. I guess what happened when we first went to Grendon was that James and I talked about setting up the studio space, and then I'd always kind of used the studio walls to kind of put ideas up and bits of research and kind of plan. I really like having a space where you're kind of surrounded by the work, so you can't kind of escape thinking about it. And I've always done that with studio spaces, and I kind of really like that kind of intensity, that when you're in the space, you're completely surrounded by the things that you're trying to work through. But another part of that is getting other people into that space so that you can talk those ideas through, so that you're not just kind of replaying things constantly in your head. You're actually having those conversations. James is in that space, so obviously use James as a sounding board for those ideas, but we'd really wanted that studio space to be a place where the men could come and talk to us about their work, but then also that I could kind of share my kind of thinking and my ideas, and kind of enter in a kind of more collaborative kind of process with generating ideas and generating a body of work. And we also kind of saw that as a positive thing in terms of us just getting, in terms of us integrating ourselves into the community there. I think we kind of felt that open door policy to the studio would really kind of help us build a kind of presence and visibility there, and start to kind of build some relationships with the residents there that were interested in being part of what we were doing. And that did work. That was great. But what I think probably happened in the first instance was that I was kind of doing a lot of work in the studio, and I'd kind of be left alone for long periods to do that. And it can be quite a quiet place where we're based. So I had an initial kind of real burst of activity around the ideas and the sketchbook work. But what happened gradually is the open door policy started to work. It kind of got to the stage, and this is genuinely not a bad thing. This isn't something I'm kind of complaining about at all. But by the time that lockdown occurred, I was getting very little work done in the studio, because as soon as we were there, the men would start visiting us, start coming in, start talking about what they were doing. And, there were some days where we couldn't move in the space because we just got so many of the residents visiting us, which was brilliant, because it kind of meant that we were doing something positive, and we were visible, and we were integrating ourselves into the community there. So that was all really, really positive. But when lockdown happened, I kind of realised the impact of that on the sketchbooks. So what it's enabled me to do is just kind of spend some time going over those ideas and that research, and kind of thinking through what I'd like to make, doing some test pieces. So it's an odd thing, really. I mean, in terms of the men, and I'll pass over to James in a moment, that's been a big loss. That's had a big impact. Not seeing them regularly and not having conversations with them, and that's kind of been difficult. But I think in terms of the practice itself, lockdown's given me quite a lot of kind of breathing space and time to just review what I was kind of doing in that first period, really. So yeah, it's kind of, it's sad for everyone. It's had its difficulties, but I think, you tease whatever kind of positives you can out of that, and you kind of think, you kind of use the time that you've got really as productively as possible. So yeah, I mean, it's been a mixed thing, I think, for me. Yeah, I mean, James, in terms of the men, you've been really busy, haven't you, with...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, just rewinding to kind of January, February, we were fully in the swing of programming. We just held an exhibition at the prison. We'd held an event at Ikon, and we were going to have a repeat screening of that, of the Becky film, at the prison as well, which we couldn't do because we were thrown into lockdown. So I suppose the positive, I suppose, is that, like I say, we've had breathing space and we can reflect on the residency, but just much more than we would have wanted, for sure. I mean, for the men, you know, the challenge immediately was, we know that the men now have loads of time, 23 hours a day in their cells. So if they've got a creative practice, then now's the time to use it, for sure, because it could get you through that psychologically. I think, you know, that would be a challenge for anybody, regardless of what they've been through in their past. But so they've got time on their side, but our access to them to inform that work is completely, well, almost entirely removed. If it weren't for services like Email a Prisoner, which are, you know, a kind of third party company runs that service. It's not an HMPS thing. So yeah, I mean, that's been tricky. You know, so we've spent our time really providing the men with materials and making sure that they can still put through orders to us, and sending in resources and other things like that. But it's, I mean, there's no way that you could justify this way of working in the long term, especially given the fact that your residency dean is completely informed by them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the great thing that's come out of it. You know, it's not like somebody said, oh, when you go into this residency at Grendon, the men have to inform every aspect of the artist in residency's work, their production, their process, but that's happened naturally. One thing that's coming into my mind more is that with a 3-year residency, you do have a lot of time to reflect, whether you're at the prison in a full swing or not. And one thing that started to happen recently is that we're kind of self-reflexively acknowledging the process now, which I've never done before. So Dean, when you were saying in the blog about the effect that a public program can have, you know, that back and forth where a program starts to kind of reflect your work back at you and then inform the work. That's really interesting to me. And, you know, I wonder how much you like to acknowledge what's going on and how much you just want to, you know, just get on with it and let it happen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I guess that's the balance, isn't it? I think, you know, you have to, interrogate what it is you're making and doing. And I think that's a kind of natural, almost kind of hidden process that takes place. But I think what things like the public programme do is exactly what you've kind of said there, that, you know, I mean, and the thing I commented on in the blog was the Beckett thing. And that was literally you and I sitting in the studio. And I probably said something to you like, oh, have you ever seen a film by Beckett? And kind of talked about it, and then mentioned that I'd made a previous piece of work in relation to it. And then by the end of the day, you go in, well, let's put that in the public programme, let's do something with that. And as soon as you start thinking about it as part of the public programme, then you start thinking, well, this would be really good for the residents as well. It will speak to them in some way. And then it will speak to the work. And so that reflexive process, I think, is really, really important. And whatever happens, I guess, in the work, I want to feel that by the end of it, that the residents at Grendon kind of feel that it speaks for them, or it speaks about their experiences, or even on a very kind of basic human level, it says it's something they can kind of identify. They can kind of, you know, what I don't want to do is kind of, it's really important that I'm not just someone who parachutes in once a week and then kind of goes and makes some work that they only see right at the end and then turn to me and go, what's all that about? You know, that would be a kind of failure for me, I think. I want them to kind of I want them to see the work at the end of the residency and not actually have those questions because they feel that they've been involved in the conversation all the way along. I think that's kind of quite an important thing. And that process of setting up those kind of public events and kind of repeating them for the residents, then I think just in some way, possibly they act as kind of just really important counterpoints where you stop and you go, okay, so what is it about Beckett's film that is informing my thinking and has associations with what the residents experience? And then that kind of feeds into how you look at the work itself as it starts to develop, I think. So, yeah, I think it's really important. You know, and the 3-year residency thing, it's the longest residency I've ever had. Previous to this, I'd done like 3-month residencies, and I did a 1-year residency. 3 years gives you a lot of breathing space, really. And then you add to that, you know, the prison itself kind of slows time a little bit for you as well. It's unique, really, I think.
Well, I've worked on so many, I don't know how many artists I've worked with in this kind of community, socially engaged way. And, you know, I've never had the luxury of 3 years or anything close to even a year before. And, you know, having done a year of this residency, I'm completely sold on that need for a long length of time with any community. You know, there's so much pressure naturally on a project where you have a community, a group, a community, whatever, and you might have 4 sessions or 8 sessions if you're really lucky. So it might be 8 weeks at most.
Yeah.
I don't even think I've worked on anything that's that lengthy in the past, and it just puts so much pressure on the group and on the artist. That can be a real barrier. I mean, sometimes it's nice to work with lots of artists over a short period of time, but you know, it's a luxury having 3 years, and I'm really excited to see what the possibilities are. I think it's already unearthed some amazing possibilities just in the first year, and we spent half of that in lockdown. So
yeah. It's all right, Niki. Should I have another question?
Yeah, sure. This one kind of builds a little bit on some of James's earlier comments, so it's probably a good time to ask it. James, how does your role as producer benefit from being on site, and has it evolved in any way from its original conception?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, has it evolved? I mean, I think I don't know whether the role itself has evolved, but my kind of understanding of what it is has. I mean, certain aspects of the role have become more and more important. You know, and that, like I say, my contact with Dean is something that is not necessarily written into the plan. You know, I could be a project manager and be fairly removed in a way, but I don't think that I could program in the way that I hope to in the next 2 years, unless I spent a great deal of time with Dean and at the prison. I think it's all about understanding for both of us, really. It's about understanding that context, and getting to know all of the participants. And I think without that you couldn't really program or really know what it is to work in the arts and criminal justice. Yeah, I'm not sure that's a very good answer to the question.
I mean, I think, and again, I guess I alluded to it in the blog. I think I'm kind of, because I can be honest, I didn't really know what a producer meant in terms of the residency until we were actually on the ground kind of doing it. And I think alongside the things that are kind of, you know, system based, it's things like, you know, if I say to you, oh, James, I'd like to do a test film in this part of the prison, immediately you go, okay, well, I'll set up a meeting with the governor and we'll talk through the restrictions, and if there's associated health and safety forms, then you know, it's kind of looking at all of that side of things. But then it's also kind of, I guess, kind of provoking content as well. You know, where you'll kind of see me doing something in the studio and say, well, you know, why are you doing that, and what is it about that you're interested in? And then that can start to kind of feed into what we do in the public programme. So it's a kind of really kind of surprising role, I think, in terms of the kind of range and breadth of stuff that you do. And there was a moment where we went to a D-Wing social, and it was one of those moments where I became aware of my inadequacy of kind of dealing with, of networking, because we were in a room full of guests that were kind of potentially interested in the programme that we're involved in. I kind of spent 2 hours talking to a couple of residents, and I think you'd worked the whole room within kind of half an hour, and come back and kind of gone, oh yeah, that person's from this organisation, that person's interested in this, they might supply some equipment for the men and all this. And it's that kind of stuff as well. I think that it's kind of, it's a constant kind of advocacy for what we're doing as well. So yeah, it's such a broad thing that I think you do.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, programming and building partnerships for the project is definitely on one side of things, but at the same time, I might be ordering acrylic paint, or one of the men might order a type of masking fluid, which might not be allowed in the prison, or, you know, nobody knows what masking fluid is, yeah, myself included, really. Yeah, so it's kind of fiercely practical in on one hand, and then completely the opposite on another. Which is something for me to keep, you know, I have to keep in check with myself there. And, you know, everything has a process in prison. That was something for both of us to get used to. And, you know, neither of us had worked in a prison before. And neither of us had worked on this kind of residency or project before. So, you know, it was definitely a learning curve. But, you know, a lot of what you would expect with a prison is pretty true, actually. You know, they are expert risk assessors. It's definitely their territory. And as long as you're asking the questions openly, then I think you can't really go wrong, you know. There's the potential to come unstuck where you're missing some piece of knowledge, but as long as you're asking those questions. I mean, the great thing for us, I think, is that Becky Hayward, who's the governor at Grendon, is happy to meet us, you know, pretty much once a month. You know, whether that's in the form of a telephone meeting last week, or, you know, face to face as we would usually do them. And, you know, we can ask her questions and she just always gives us a positive answer. It might not be a direct, yes, just go ahead and do it. It usually isn't, but she'll say, look, if you want to do that, then you need to do this, this and this. Here are the people to go ahead and talk to. And then you know, she's kind of patient with us in that way. And they are really generous and
yeah,
definitely interested in what we're doing, more than interested, you know, they're completely invested in it. I think the thing for the prison is that they have the will to do everything. You know, they'd want to do more. You know, they'd love to have an artist in residence, I think, at Spring Hill, which is the adjoining prison. But it's, you know, it's their lack of knowledge of the arts or capacity to actually fundraise or, you know, start those conversations that's the problem. You know, they're all working incredibly hard, and they're working in such a different way and answering different questions entirely, you know.
I mean, also having Becky as such a kind of positive voice, you know, and again, rightly so, everything you do somebody's going to question you on. And if you're able to say, yeah, we've met with Becky and she's agreed this, or, you know, Becky has told us this is okay as long as we speak to you about it. That's been a really positive thing. She's not kind of palmed us off or turned us away at any stage. And it means that when you are trying to do something, if you can kind of quote her, that immediately kind of smooths things going forward, doesn't it? Because she's kind of, you know, agreed whatever it is that we've asked for. So yeah, she's been really positive, hasn't she? Yeah.
I mean, the thing that's unique to Grendon is that you can feel like you're going around different factions. You know, you've got the entire team of therapists and psychologists, which is kind of one faction. Then you've got security and wing officers, and you've got the prison management. And so you could go to each of them and potentially get a different answer for the same question at the time. So if we start with Becky and then work our way from there, you know, we can get a lot more done, I think.
And I mean, it's quite interesting as well that all the wings operate differently.
Yeah.
And that's something that took us a little while to get our heads around, is that, you know, each of the wings has their own community meeting, they have their own chairperson, and they set community rules. And so, you know, you find yourself talking to one person from, say, D wing about an event you're trying to organise, and you say the same thing to B wing resident, and a B wing resident will say, oh yeah, it's a different process for us, we have to do it this way. And that was an adjustment thing as well. You kind of think, well, surely all the wings, if we set up something one way for one wing, it's the same for all, and it's not, you know. And so that was quite, and that's also been kind of something, I think, in your role, James, that, you know, has been part of another kind of thing that you've kind of organised and eased through, that we have to kind of deal with things slightly differently for different wings. So yeah. I mean, the nice thing, you know, for me, is that having James there means that I haven't got to fill in health and safety forms, and, you know, and I did go to the health and safety meeting, though, to be fair. I did sit in on the health and safety meeting for one of the workshops, but it does mean that, you know, we can kind of share it a little bit more. And I know that because on the previous residency, Ed didn't have a producer, so I know that, you know, that took a lot for him to do it alone, you know, all of those kind of things. So yeah, it's a blessing for me, because I can get on and make work, you know. And spend
I suppose it's that. Yeah, I think the format is definitely working. You know, having, you know, we have very different hats on most of the time, and it's probably good for you to not have to think about risk assessing. Really, you know, I mean, I've never really seen that as an artist job in the different projects that I've worked on in the past. You know, that would always be my territory, for sure, begrudgingly, of course.
Yeah.
It seems like a really unorthodox but really beneficial kind of relationship that you have on site. But I suppose it's kind of an unorthodox kind of residency.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I know James has got a little bit frustrated with, and it's something we've both kind of acknowledged, is that I think the residents have taken a long time to separate us. And I'm sure at one point they were just saying the artists in residence, because it was kind of easy for them. But understandable, you know, we are there together most of the time, and they see us as a unit, I think. but yeah, no, it's you know, I don't think I'd have got as far as I have with the work and the ideas that I want to kind of explore if I'd had all the things that James does. In fact, I'd probably be about a week into it in real terms. But yeah.
Okay, I'll move on to another question then. So as present MA students, it can feel as though there's a big gap between where our current situation is and the one that Dean is in as artist in residence at present. So what advice could you both offer to those of us who will be seeking such opportunities post-graduation?
I mean, I think having access to the right networks is a good starting point. I mean, Dean, you've done residencies at Birmingham Midland Institute, at New Art Gallery Warsaw, now at Ikon. Are there any others? Or
I think there is, but I can't think at the moment. My mind's gone blank on that one. Those are the main ones.
Yeah. So I suppose if you're working in the region in the Midlands, then it would be, I mean, definitely keeping an eye on where opportunities are posted. So that could be places like Arts Professional, or the Arts Council website. The kind of jobs bit will definitely have these kind of opportunities advertised, and even just social media. You know, who you're following on Instagram. You know, Ikon posting any opportunities that come up, and sharing others even. So I think making sure you're hearing about the right opportunities is definitely, definitely worth doing. I mean, Dean, how did you find out about your other residencies?
Yeah, I guess it's a strange one, really. So they came off the back of exhibiting. So I had an exhibition at Wolverhampton Art Gallery, and one of the curators moved from Wolverhampton to New Art Gallery Warsaw. And one of the things she was tasked with was introducing a residency programme. And because we'd worked together on the exhibition that I'd done, she contacted me and said, I don't even know if you're interested in this or how you'd feel about it, but do you want to come and have a chat about what you might do if you had a residency? And so I kind of was really lucky that timing aligned there. Had that person have moved 6 months later, or they'd have probably worked with 2 or 3 other artists in that time and kind of thought, oh, I'll ask those. Or I don't know really, but I guess what was important about the residency at Warsaw, and they were incredibly supportive there. So they see the residencies as or they see part of the residency as a responsibility on their part to support the person in the space. So you're not just kind of left alone in that space. They will be trying to get people to meet with you from other galleries, from other arts organisations, so that they start to build that kind of network for you as part of the residency, which I think is a really good thing to do. But the other thing that I did when I was on the residency at Warsaw is I scheduled some time towards the end where I invited as many people from other galleries and arts organisations to come and see what I'd done on the residency. So I invited Jonathan from Ikon, and he kindly took time to come over and talk to me about what I'd done. And that led to a second show at Ikon, actually, an offsite show. So a little bit of it, I think, is about dialogue. And when I moved to the Birmingham Midland Institute, again, it was a similar situation. So the person in charge of the residency programme there, I'd worked with on a previous exhibition. And that person was aware that I'd done the residency at Warsaw, so I could function in that role, and kind of invited me in to talk through some of the things that I might be interested in doing. They then offered me a 1-year residency, which just seemed like a massive amount of time at that point. But again, I scheduled some time, and I invited you, James. I remember you came and did a studio visit while I was on that residency. And I met with just quite a few people during that time to talk about what I'd been doing and what I was interested in. So it's kind of the thing that I kind of previously said I'm not very good at, which is kind of that networking thing. I think it's easier to show what you can do while you're doing it. So if you're on a residency, I would kind of schedule some time and almost try and book people in to say, look, this is what I'm doing. This is the kind of work I'm making. This is how I've been approaching the residency. And also accept that nothing might come of that, but it's good to talk and it's good to have that dialogue. And I mean, it was a very different process for the Grendon because it was an advert. It was
formal, wasn't it?
It was a formal application process for that. So it was a different kind of situation. But then it's a very different residency, I think. So I guess if it was advice, I'd just kind of make sure that it sounds like a really kind of flippant thing to say, but just that you're talking to as many people as you can about the things that you're doing. And part of what we do on the MAs is we have people like James and Deb and Kevin from Warsaw who spend time with you guys, and that's kind of that's an introduction that, you know, we're lucky to have, but they're then people that you can talk to, and I think that's an important thing, really. And not be afraid to fail spectacularly. You know, when I applied for the Grendon thing, and you know, I can be open about this. I spoke to Jonathan, the director of Ikon, and I almost kind of shrugged my shoulders and said to him, is there any point me applying for this? There's lots of famous artists that were at that show at Grendon. It's not going to be me, is it? And he was like, oh, no, I think you should apply for it. And kind of, you know, that was encouraging and got me to fill the application in. But, you know, I still kind of went into it thinking, well, nothing might come of this, but that's okay, kind of thing. You know, it's good to have those conversations and still kind of be involved in talking about these things, because you get to learn a little bit more each time about how things work. And so, yeah, I'd say that possibly. Is that an answer to the question?
I think my advice for working with an institution would be, you know, be involved in the program, be involved in the public programs that are already there. You know, I know that our head of learning, Lindsay, she says that she's never got a job without first going to that institution and you know, being actively involved with it, introducing herself to the learning team, or, you know, and you can find out a great deal about any institution from their website as well, which sounds like a really simple thing, but you really can kind of figure out what the priorities are there. And if it comes to a kind of almost job interview like scenario, like the one that you were in, Dean, you know, you already knew so much about Ikon and the way that we operate, that, you know, you've definitely got a head start there, you know, on anybody else applying.
Yeah,
that's really useful. Thank you for all of us. Okay, this one's for Dean. What role does Instagram play in relation to your practice? Is the interest of an audience an important consideration when contemplating your potential work?
That's a really good question. Yeah, how do I answer that? Yeah, because obviously I use Instagram. I'm not very good at social networking. And I think it was the Warsaw Residency where I was kind of asked about, would it be okay if you're active on Facebook? And I've never had a Facebook account. So I was kind of like, I'm really sorry, I don't know how to do that. I don't use Facebook. And they were kind of really good, and they just went, just open an Instagram account then, as long as you're active on social media. So it's really from that first residency that I kind of started to get into the habit of posting regularly, kind of the things that were going on in the studio. I think it's, I think over lockdown, I think when people have kind of liked and commented on the work that I'm making, it's been encouraging. So I think it works in that way. And I think it's useful in terms of, like, you know, when I've written a blog, and to kind of just kind of say to people, oh, there's a new blog up, you know. So it's useful in that sense. I guess what I'm kind of moving towards is, and I think where maybe the root of the question is how useful is it in terms of my kind of reflexive understanding of what's going on in the work. And I think it's useful, and I genuinely do kind of, like, you know, at the end of a month, I might kind of flip back through the things I've posted, and then they become kind of snapshots of kind of what I've been thinking about. So they kind of really focus in on, okay, well, those are the things that you're obviously thinking about this month, and those are the things that are kind of important to you. I don't know if I've ever asked whether that then influences or affects the way I'm thinking about it. It's the same with the blog to a certain extent. I often only read the blog once when it's posted, just to see if I wrote anything I didn't really want to write. But then probably a couple of months later, I'll go back to a blog post and kind of think, oh, that's where I was at that point. And that might kind of feed into the way I'm kind of thinking about making the work. Sometimes I think the Instagram post can surprise me. I can kind of go back 3 or 4 months and kind of look at something and go, oh, yeah, that's what I was doing then. And that can be a good or bad thing. I don't know, I'm in the habit of doing it. And I think that's also good for me, to be in the habit of things. So yeah, I'm not sure how well I'm answering your question. I'm just kind of talking to it, really, aren't I? I don't think Instagram, if I phrased it this way, if I didn't have Instagram, I would still make the work. And I would probably find myself going through the sketchbooks, perhaps in more detail, physically. Not that I don't go through them in detail, but I might kind of go, okay, let's just go right back to the beginning and have a look at what I was doing there. Whereas with Instagram, I can kind of go, right, I'll go back 4 or 5 months and I can just go, oh, okay, and have that kind of snapshot moment. So yeah, don't know. I mean, the short test films I put up on Instagram, I've really found viewing them in that environment does something slightly different, because obviously that I can only have stills of those in the sketchbook. So having that accessible kind of snapshot short sequence has worked. And I think that's been really useful to review and think about. And often when I'm kind of making notes in the sketchbooks, I'll replay that on Instagram and just go, oh, yeah, that bit's working, isn't it, there? And that bit's not working so well. And I can kind of review it. So I guess in that sense, with the moving image, the short clips, Instagram's playing quite a part in the development of the work. I don't know whether you want to say anything about it, James.
I mean, I think for you, it's definitely not just a practical, you know, here's what I'm doing, join in with this webinar, or do you know what I mean? It's not purely practical. I think like your website, it can be, you know, it can be practical. It can have your CV on there and whatever else, and, you know, talks that you've done or something, but also it can be a kind of curated selection of the work that you've done over a period of years, which is useful to a number of different people, you know, let alone yourself, I guess. But I mean, you know, it's good that, you know, we can share everything that we're doing through Instagram and through Facebook and other places for me, because it means that, you know, we can build partnerships from that. You know, there are people that have come to events who, you know, have then subsequently visited the Prism because of, you know, because they've seen what we're doing online. So for me, for my role, it's definitely so important to have, you know, really strong comms around the project.
Mm-hmm.
Have we been through all of
great.
the...
Thank you. No further questions from the MA, but if I can just take a moment to thank you both for engaging with us on this, and also to thank Claire for her organisation. And I think if there's nothing further, I can pass back to Claire.
That's great. Thanks, Niki. Thanks for all your work as well with this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Niki. That was great. Some really, really good questions there. Before we go, I just want to thank Dean and James again for part 2 of what is just a super interesting project. And again, thanks, Niki, for taking part and for asking the questions, and to all of the students out there. We hope you get lots from that. Our next ArtsFest online event will be on Tuesday, the 11th of August, featuring Dr. Jenny Gilbert and the rise of mass fashion in the Black Country. So that proves to be quite interesting. This can be booked through Eventbrite, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.